In this presentation, we're going to briefly look at some items that you could put in a Faraday cage to protect them from an electromagnetic pulse. In a previous episode, we showed how to make a Faraday cage very inexpensively from buying 2 garbage cans at the home improvement store and putting it together with instructions for installation. And now we're going to address what do you put in the Faraday cage to protect your electronics. The first on the list would be emergency radios. There's a variety of emergency radios. The key is that you want it to be battery powered, preferably rechargeable batteries. If you have one and it's not rechargeable, you'd want to make sure that you include in the Faraday cage some new batteries appropriate for that radio. Otherwise, if they're rechargeable, you want to charge it up before you store it. And in my opinion, the best one option to have is one that can also be either solar powered or preferably wind up with a crank like the one in the middle of this picture. The advantage of solar is you can, like the one that's black and white on the middle left, is you could set it outside and the sun could charge the batteries. The problem is, what if there isn't any sun enough to do that, and these small solar panels are going to go very slowly in charging. So if you could have that option and or preferably the hand crank, then you and your friends could take turns cranking the handle to run the radio, because when you need to know what's going on, you don't want to be waiting a day for the batteries to charge. So do your research. This doesn't have to be expensive. We bought a Red Cross one that was, I think, under $100, and it had a hand crank on it as well. The key is you want to be able to receive shortwave as well as emergency broadcast. All of your AM and FM stations in that kind of emergency would be part of the emergency broadcast system. So any radio, AM or FM, would be able to get the local information that you need for your region. The next item category on the list is flashlights. Now there are a variety of flashlights, from cheap ones that have batteries to more expensive ones that are rechargeable. Remember, these are going to be stored in the Faraday cage rather than being plugged in and being charged. So if you have ones that are running on batteries, you want to make sure that you have a set of brand new batteries outside of the flashlight. So if they go bad, they're not going to contaminate the flashlight with acid. I would put the batteries in a Ziploc bag and have the flashlight empty. If it's rechargeable, then you want to fully charge it before you store it. And very likely, if you have the items that we're going to talk about here, you'll have a way to charge the flashlight battery up again once it starts running out. The next category is power generation. So the most common way to get power would be solar. And of course, that doesn't work at night, and it doesn't work as well in cloudy days. But solar is free, and it does work. And what we have pictured here is a unit that's a small solar panel and a battery system that can be charged up. If you had a unit like this, then you would want to plug it in and charge it with the AC plug-in cord before you store it. So when you need it, it's fully charged, and then use the solar panel to trickle charge, maintain the battery when you're out using it. You'll notice this unit has a flashlight. It has an indicator of how much battery there is. It has USB ports so you can charge your phones. It's got all the little adapters. So a unit like this might be worth looking into. The next category is solar charger. This is a little bit bigger than what we just saw. This is three small solar panels that come in a unit. Places like Harbor Freight sell these kind of setups, and they have the power inverter unit you'll see on the left there that has different plugins, and in this case it has some lights that can be used. It also has plugins for charging, say, a car battery, or the pigtail allows you to plug into different kinds of ports like USB. So we have one of these from Harbor Freight. It's still in the box, and we're not taking it out unless we need it. Generally, it's understood, although EMP, nobody knows for sure because there has not been an EMP during modern times when everything's microelectronics. But the assumption is that if you have a device that's plugged in to the grid or something else with a long cord on it, that whether it's turned on or off probably is going to get affected by the EMP. If you have a unit like this and it's not plugged in, the assumption is that it will survive an EMP. Then you could take it out of the box and set it up and have a little bit of power generating capabilities from the sun. So in case that seems a little expensive, here's a real cheap one, $36.99 at Harbor Freight. Has a little solar panel, has a USB adapter to plug phones and things like that in. It has terminal clamps, so you could trickle charge, say, a car battery, cigarette lighter adapter to be able to plug it into your car, and so forth. Keep in mind, the cheaper it is, the longer it would take to do any significant charging. The next is car repair parts. Now, while a person needs to consider what their vehicle is, let's talk for a minute about vehicles. We have an old Honda Accord that has no electronics on it. We bought it new in '89. We have an old Isuzu diesel pickup that has no electronics in it. Both of them are rarely used. They are EMP vehicles. Our hybrid car will not work. Our four-wheel drive pickup will not work if the microelectronics are damaged from an EMP. So we have these older vehicles on standby in case we need to. But let's say you have an EMP and there's a component on it that's damaged, maybe a computer chip or something like that. If you happen to be a mechanic and adept to knowing what to do, you might want to store some vulnerable components for your vehicle. But being as that's such a broad a list of things that it could be, and most of us don't have that knowledge, we're going to focus on another aspect of an automotive emergency, and that is, what if you're in your car and there's an EMP and it goes down? The other day, some friends of ours and us did an exercise without warning, and it was a scenario that you just got hit by an EMP, you're in your car, and you're 25 miles from home. What do you have in your car that can help you make your way back to home? Because during the first day of an EMP, everybody's going to be confused. The second day, a little more confusion. The third day, pandemonium. And it would be dangerous to be out and about. So if you were stuck with an EMP and your car quit running and you're not home and you're within a couple days walking distance, then you want to make it a high priority to get away and get home. So it's worth giving some thought to, what do I have in my car right now that would be helpful in that kind of situation? Now, most of these items don't have anything to do with a Faraday cage, but it's something related to think about. You might want to have some kind of a package, a bug out bag or something in your vehicle with emergency items, some emergency food, a flashlight, some rain gear, extra socks, etc. Give some thought to that. The next to put in a Faraday cage is a computer and a drive. Yes, a computer has a drive in it, but there's a certain amount of limited storage. They make some thumb drives that can be like 2 terabytes. They're not that expensive and they can hold an awful lot of stuff and take very little room, or you can have an external hard drive. So you want to analyze, in my case, what I did is I had an old laptop I'm not using anymore and an external hard drive I wasn't using anymore. And I copied onto the external drive a bunch of things that I thought would be useful at a time that you no longer can get on the internet. The grid's down, the internet's down. Your computer might work if it's stored in the Faraday cage, but you're not going to get on the internet, go to YouTube, and find some how-tos. So what I do is I use an application. There's lots of them, but Vidly is the one I use, YouTube downloader. And I go to YouTube, I find the video that I want of how to do something in an emergency, use that utility to download it as a MP4, and then store it on the hard drive. So you could do that with anything you wanted to be able to know how to do in video, do-it-yourself kinds of things by storing those on an external drive. Or, like I say, you can buy a high capacity thumb drive with, say, 2 terabytes, and you can store a lot of videos on there. The next is medical devices. Here again, it depends on what your particular family's medical needs are. In our particular family situation, we have some people who need to be gluten-free. I'm personally diabetic of type 2. So a person needs to analyze what is it that you need medical equipment wise that might get damaged by an EMP, like a glucose reader, monitor, any things like that. Now medications, those are not going to be affected by an EMP because they're not electronic, so those could be stored in some other place. But anything that's electronic, you want to consider whether it ought to be stored in the Faraday cage, particularly if it is very important to your life and well-being. The next category is cordless tools. Now, it depends how handy and all of that, but most of us know how to use a drill. And the problem is, what cordless tools would you want to store in the cage, Faraday cage? And that's a decision that you'd have to make. There are some devices that are smaller than others, rechargeable. You don't want to have one that you have to plug in if you don't happen to have electricity. So anyway, that's in a category to consider. I've seen some very small multitask type cordless tools that basically could fit in the palm of your hand. You may want to look into that because you may very well need to drill a hole or some kind of thing like that, and you'll wish you had some way to do it. The next category is LED light bulbs or compact fluorescents could be an option. The reason I suggest this is I'm not sure whether an electronic light bulb like an LED is going to survive an EMP or not. So it wouldn't hurt to have some spare bulbs in your Faraday cage in the likelihood that once you're back and going, you would have some electricity from, say, solar or something like that, where you could plug it in and have some light. You'll recall that a minute ago I showed you a inexpensive solar 3-panel thing from Harbor Freight that included 2 or 3 compact fluorescent lights ready to go plug in to the system. So give some consideration because you don't want to be running your flashlights indefinitely. You're going to run out of power. Another item is a clock. Now, have a watch, and that'll probably be good. especially if it's not digital. Many of us have a cell phone, and if you're not going to have your cell phone in a Faraday cage because you want to have it on you, so there's a possibility that the cell phone may not work. The cell towers might not work, but actually the cell phone might continue to operate, which has a clock and things like that in it. There again, in the likelihood that um, your phone still worked, or the laptop in the Faraday cage, you might want to do some text files of how-tos and lists of things to do. For instance, what if there's a nuclear bomb detonated 50 miles away? What would you do? And it's good to think about that ahead of time and make a list. I've got to go get this. I've got to go do that. I've got to go here. I've got to communicate with other people. So it's good to think these things through ahead of time. And it would help to have a document or a file on your phone or on the laptop that gives you some checklist of things that you might not think of in the emergency moment. So here's, as far as a clock goes, here's one of these portable radios, and it has a clock on it, so that's helpful. Another item is a digital camera. Now, most of us have smartphones these days, and we don't necessarily have a digital. You can buy a really nice digital camera really cheap. Here's one. Um, I don't know if it was Walmart or someplace like that for 20 bucks. And so that way you'd have the ability to take pictures. Here again, it can be stored in the Faraday cage with the battery fully charged and ready to go. Now, a voltmeter is handy, and even if you're not overly electrically savvy, a voltmeter can be fairly simple to use. It's important because you don't want to get electrocuted or shocked when there's no medical services available. So it's helpful to have a simple uh, voltmeter. Harbor Freight used to give them away. They're probably 20 bucks or less now. And that way you can test to see if you're actually getting power out of your house system, whether the solar system's working, whether your battery is charged. There's all kinds of benefits of being able to have a voltmeter. And then a DVD player. And you might say, well, why would I want to have a DVD player? Well, if you're down for quite a while, it could get kind of boring, and it might be good to have some entertainment. So here's an inexpensive DVD player. It's self-contained, battery operated, can be plugged in to charge it. So there again, if you wanted one of those, you could put that in your Faraday cage. If you're going to use your laptop to watch videos, that's good, but it'll probably take more time to charge the batteries on your laptop than it would on a DVD player. Maybe not. And then an MP3 player to play music. Uh, Here again, you can have MP3s on your computer, but do you want to have your computer running all the time when you're trying to listen to music? The MP3 player doesn't take much electricity, and it might be a good device to have in the Faraday cage with your favorite music already on it and the battery fully charged. And last of all, let's assume that you have some form of a solar uh, generating system in place, and there's an EMP. Your solar panels assumably will not be damaged, but you have a couple of, and your batteries either, but there's a couple of components in the system that could very well and likely would get damaged. The first one is called a charge controller. Depending on how many batteries and how big a system you have, they could be pretty small, like the lower right-hand corner charge controller, not expensive. Even if your present solar system is bigger, you would be better off to have what you could afford for a backup, some cheap alternative rather than having nothing when the time comes. And the other component is a power inverter. And here again, depending on how big a system you have, you could purchase a Chinese knockoff equivalent in theory to your big expensive power inverter. And even though it costs a fraction of the cost of the good quality one you may have, it would be better than having nothing. And so you would want to match your power inverter capacity to what you currently have so that you'd be able to get enough. And the one on the right's a fairly inexpensive, made in China type one as well. And here again, it depends on how much power you need to run what you're trying to run. Keep in mind, if there's an EMP, you're going to be cramping down way down on your power consumption by intent, because you won't need a lot of the bells and whistles that your everyday life has. But let's say you have a refrigerator and a freezer. You're going to want to keep them going or you're going to lose your food. Let's say you have a well and you need to keep that water pump having power. There again, consider, does the water pump take 240 volts or 120 volts? So these are some things to consider if you have a solar power system with batteries. And these two components are the things to keep in mind, and to have some inexpensive alternative in a Faraday cage. So if the system goes down, you have the wherewithal to replace it with the cheaper, less expensive components to get you back up and going again. So these are my suggestions for some items that could go in your Faraday cage. Here again, depending how many things and how big, you may need more than one Faraday cage. I have more than one, made from garbage cans. But you may think of some things that are not on this list that would be useful to you, important to your lifestyle or your medical needs, for instance. Give some thought to it and start working on building a Faraday cage and putting the necessary equipment in it to give yourself your best chance to survive the impacts of an EMP. Keep in mind, when there's an EMP, if it takes the grid down, it's probably not coming back for a number of years, and it's going to get really bad in the meantime. So your ability to be self-sustaining in that grid down scenario would be really helpful. One last comment is it is assumed that metal surrounding a electronic item is the key to helping to create a Faraday cage. So if you have a metal pole barn or shop, put the Faraday cage in the shop. So not only is the metal can, like I described in the previous video, helping to protect, but by putting it inside the metal building, it's going to be one more layer of protection, we assume.